All right, Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11. While you're turning there, we're going to start in verse 20 here this evening. We're going to look at three different men because all three of them have the same, very similar kind of a category of faith. All of it is very, very future-oriented. So as we start in verse 20, you'll see it in just a moment. We start off, as we have in the past, with verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And this evening, as we look at these three men who made the hall of faith, all three are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So his son, grandson, and great-grandson, and we're going to look at all of them. All three of these men had something in common, and it is faith regarding a future that none of them would live to see. None of these men would be able to see the things that they made it into the hall of faith for. None of them would have an acceptance of it. None of them would be able to rejoice for having received it, but they rejoiced knowing that one day their descendants would. So, we start off with Isaac in verse 20, and I'm calling this hesitant faith. Okay? Hesitant faith. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. Verse 20, it says, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. I think it's significant that it includes both of his sons, his twin sons. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Now, Isaac is the patriarch about which we know the least in Scripture. We know a great deal about Abraham. We know an awful lot about Jacob. We know very, very little when it comes to Isaac. He's the son of promise. Remember, Genesis chapter 12, the Abrahamic Covenant. He promised a land, a seed, and a blessing. This is the seed, the son of Sarah and Abraham, Isaac. And so his story is found in Genesis 24 and following. So it's very broken up because about halfway through the life of Jacob, halfway through the life of Isaac, the story of Jacob starts. And it really focuses on Jacob, and then Isaac just kind of puts in an appearance. But I want you to just keep your finger here. We'll come back in just a moment, but let's look back in Genesis. And we'll look at chapter 25 and kind of get the story because there's some significant things here that I think you know this story very, very well. The story of Jacob and Esau and Isaac, you know this story. But Genesis 25 verse 20 says, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. So very similar to his father, Abraham. He married his wife when he was 40, and he would eventually have sons, but he had to entreat the Lord because his wife, Rebekah, was barren for a period of time. She was not able to have children, but she did conceive in answer to his prayer, and she bore twins. She bore Esau, which literally translates, anybody know? Hairy. Yeah, hairy, red hair. And Jacob, which means heel holder, heel grabber, supplanter, deceiver. Well, both of these boys would certainly live up to their names in Jacob's case in more ways than one.
Was he more than likely the second born?
He was the second. He was the second born. Yep. But he was, well, if you want to get real technical about it, Jacob made the first appearance, right? Because when Esau was born, his hand was holding on to Esau's foot, hence his name, heel grabber. So Isaac's intro into the hall of faith is in reference to the blessing of his sons, which is actually found in Genesis 27. So you can flip over there. This is a familiar story when Jacob deceived his father to get the blessing of the firstborn. Now, God did not endorse Jacob's dishonest behavior, but the outcome of Jacob's deceit was superintended in accordance with prophecy. So, talk back to me, give me a little bit of the story so that I know that you're following with me. Which of the sons, Jacob or Esau, was Isaac's favorite? Esau. Why did he like Esau? Because he was a hunter and he liked his food. Okay, so on the level of choosing favorites for your children, you know that's not a good reason. But is this a good reason, even among bad reasons? No. This is extremely shallow. Okay? For Isaac to pick a favorite. Well, why do you like Esau best? Well, he makes good food, right? It just sounds kind of cheap, and it is. And we know that the day that in Genesis chapter, in the passage that we're going to look at here in just a moment, Isaac sent Esau out, and he said, "The day of my death may be upon me." Now, he would go on to live for decades, but he says, "I might be dying, and so I want you to go out, and I want you to shoot a deer, and I want you to prepare venison for me the way that I love, and then I want you to come back so that I can bless you." And so that was kind of what he set out to do. And so we come to the story of what exactly happened. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 23, let me give you the prophecy here real quick. This is the Lord talking to Rebekah. It says, "And the Lord said unto her," this is when she was expecting, "The Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb. 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people. And the elder shall serve the younger." The elder being Esau, the younger being Jacob. The elder shall serve the younger. Not normal. Nothing about this was normal. Okay? And again, Isaac, when he decided that he was going to pass the blessing to Esau, it almost, and I can't say this definitively here as I'm standing here, but it wouldn't have been right, would it? If Isaac would have given the blessing to Esau, because God said the blessing is going to go to the younger. So, interesting, kind of a different thought for us. But Isaac blessed Jacob with the blessing of the firstborn, recorded for us in Genesis 27, verse 28. It says, this is the blessing. This is why he made it into the hall of faith. It says, "Therefore, God give thee of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren. Let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee." Now, you remember the situation. Who does Isaac think he's blessing when he does this? Esau. You remember why? Because Jacob had taken Esau's clothing and he put goat skin on, which tells us that Esau was not your average hairy. Okay, he's hairy like an animal, and he comes in, and his father is deceived. So when Isaac says these words in Genesis 27, 28, down and 29, he thinks he's blessing Esau, but he's not. Now, again, God is not endorsing the deceit that put Jacob here. But it is, as I said, superintended, and it is fulfilling prophecy. Because God said, the elder shall serve the younger. And that's exactly what's happening. Does anything about that last phrase sound familiar to you when it says, "Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee"? Does that sound familiar at all? The Abrahamic Covenant, Genesis chapter 12. So what is happening right here is Isaac, the son of promise, the heir of the Abrahamic Covenant, is passing on the Abrahamic Covenant, he thinks, to Esau. But he's not. He's passing it on to Jacob. Now, what happened right after this? Well, Jacob ducked out of the tent, and who came in? Esau, right? And Isaac is confused. He says, "I already blessed you." He says, No, you didn't bless me. I don't remember. And so Esau is broken, and he starts crying. And so his father blesses him, which again, he makes it into the hall of faith in Hebrews 11 for the blessing of Jacob and Esau. So let's read Esau's blessing. It's in verse 39 of chapter 27 of Genesis. "And Isaac, his father, answered and said unto him." So now he knows what's going on. He accidentally passed the covenant on to Jacob. So he's giving something. Think of it as a consolation prize. I'm sure Esau did. Okay? He says, Behold, thy dwelling shall be with the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. By thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. Now, obviously, Isaac knew, as he says these things, that he wouldn't be around to enforce these decrees. Again, Isaac thought that he would die very soon. He went on to live for decades yet. But he is absolutely dependent upon God for the fulfillment of these. Just as Abraham had been dependent on God to fulfill the Abrahamic Covenant to him and to Isaac, so Isaac now passes this covenant of faith on to his son, specifically Jacob. Yes, sir.
This tradition, was it a godly tradition, or was it more of an inheritance thing, the blessing?
Well, it's very much a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Very much, yes. But it would, with no exceptions, basically, it went to the oldest.
Yeah.
So the thing that makes this significant is it got switched. But as we'll see, because what you just asked, we'll see the next two men who make it into the Hall of Faith make it for very much the same reason. Yes, sir.
His wife wasn't Jewish then, was she?
Rebecca?
Say she was from Syria.
No, she was. Yep.
Was there any type of,
Kind of odd, really.
Well, so Jacob's wives would both be Syrian as well.
Yeah.
is there any type of enforcement to this covenant other than God's? I mean, was there any people present other than father and son, or Esau and Jacob?
No, which is exactly the point of Hebrews 20. Exactly the point is there's nobody else to enforce this. So Isaac knows that he won't be around to enforce these. He's not powerful enough to enforce these after he passes. So he's entirely dependent because he's really just passing on God's promise, isn't he? God made a promise to Abraham in Genesis 12. Abraham passed it to Isaac. Now Isaac passes it on to Jacob. So it's just a continuation. Isaac had faith in the promises of God, not his ability to carry them out. He had faith in the promises of God, and he passed that belief along to his sons. Now, Esau lived, he went on to lead a wretched life. He did live by his sword. And he was under his brother, and then he broke away, and they had a very tenuous truce later on in life, but this came to pass. Jacob did have the increase of corn and wine and sons, right? He had 12 sons that would follow after this. All of this in accordance with his faith, not in his ability, because he really didn't do anything. All of this in accordance with his faith in God. That's why he makes it into the Hall of Faith. Do you see why I call this kind of a hesitant faith? It almost looks like he went into it backwards, because he didn't even mean for it to happen how it did. But God superintended one of Jacob's sins. It was wrong for him to do what he did, to deceive his father. But God worked those things together for good. And Isaac makes it into the Hall of Faith, not because he was a good father necessarily, but because he had faith to say, my son, this is what God said, and this is what you can take to the bank. So we have hesitant faith to start. Now we come now to the second part. It's difficult. I switch these names up on the best of days. I'm really struggling tonight because we're dealing with all three. We're dealing with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We come to Jacob is the next. And I'm going to call his non-traditional faith. Non-traditional faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21, it says, by faith Jacob, when he was a-dying, I don't know what the is in there for. I'm guessing maybe a southerner wrote this. Jacob, when he was a-dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning upon the top of his staff. Again, why did Isaac make it in? Because of the blessing to his sons. Why does Jacob make it in? Because of the blessing not to his sons, but to his grandsons, to Joseph's sons. very similar to the blessing that we already talked about. Genesis 48 and 49 record Jacob's last words. One of these Wednesdays we'll start into a series and we'll cover Genesis 49. It is amazing, the prophecies that he gives in his blessings and the correction and all sorts of stuff that he gives. All 12 of Jacob's sons live in Egypt. Who was the first one to get down to Egypt? Joseph, not of his own volition. Remember, he got sold, and he was down there. God sent him beforehand to save their lives. He rose in power after a long series of ups and downs. He's now essentially the prime minister of the world superpower, and there's a big famine in the land, so the other sons come down along with their father. They're all there. All their families are down in Egypt. And it comes time, the famine's now over, and they've just settled in Goshen, and they're living in Goshen. And it comes time for Jacob to pass blessing along. And it starts in chapter 48. So turn to Genesis 48, and we'll look at verse 10. This is some interesting stuff here, considering how Jacob got his blessing. Genesis 48, verse 10. Now the eyes of Israel, which is another name for Jacob, the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. Now, you remember what happened when Jacob wanted a blessing and he picked on his dad? Why? Because his eyes were dim and he couldn't see. Okay, so it's kind of coming home to roost here a little bit. Okay? And he this is Joseph, brought them, his sons, near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand, toward Israel's left hand. Okay, follow along here. This little bit of word picture here. And Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand. So he's facing his dad. Dad's sitting on a bed. He walks in, pulls his two young sons out, and he puts one on the right, one on the left, and he does it on purpose. Very much on purpose. He's guiding them to his father's hands so that his dad can reach straight out. Because why? Because he's blind. And put his hand on the head of the appropriate boy. He wants his father's right hand to be on the head of his eldest. Because where do blessings go? To the eldest. Okay, so Joseph is being very careful to accomplish that. Incidentally, do you think Jacob might have told his sons how he got the blessing from his father? You never know. I think he probably did. So he's eliminating human error here. Okay, he goes in, he's got it all set. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So here's what happens. Joseph very carefully arranges all of this, comes in with Manasseh and Ephraim. He has Ephraim so that the father, Ephraim's over here, so that dad's left hand will naturally go on Ephraim's head, and Manasseh on his left hand so that dad's right hand will naturally go to his head. And his dad, who's sitting there, he can't really see, he goes, can you imagine what's going on in Joseph's head? Man, no, Dad. No. This is not how it's supposed to be. You're messing it up. But notice the word that's used here. He guided his hands wittingly. This wasn't a mistake. Jacob does this on purpose. He crosses his hands, puts his right hand on Ephraim, the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh, the elder son. Verse 17. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. Wait, Dad, you're messing this up. Verse 18, and Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a great people. He also shall be great, but truly his younger brother shall be a greater than he. And his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he said Ephraim before Manasseh. Isaac, the son of Abraham, the father of Jacob, was deceived, and he gave the blessing to the younger son, thinking it was the firstborn. But that's not the case here. This was a full acknowledgement. He knew it. He knew what he was doing. He did the blessing against culture. Against culture, he went, again, non-traditionally. And this is exactly what happened. Now, when you think of this, Joseph, there is no tribe of Joseph. There is the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Manasseh. So Joseph, the favored son of Jacob, essentially got double. He got two portions. And if you go home and look at a map, or you might have one in the back of your Bible, if you look, Manasseh got a great portion of land, but Ephraim would go on to become the most powerful of the tribes in the north. Ephraim, if you remember Samaria, where the palace was in the northern kingdom, all of this happened in Ephraim. And so, Jacob makes it into the hall of faith because of his non-traditional faith, as he crossed his hands and gave the blessing on his grandsons. Again, would he be around to make sure that Ephraim was the greatest? No. So what was his faith? His faith was, God told me to do this way, and I'm gonna count on him to do it. Faith, again, all forward-looking faith. All faith that looked all the way beyond the grave, very definitely. In this case, that would go on for generations. Yes, sir?
But the lineage come down through
Judah.
Judah.
Yeah.
And that was Joseph's brother, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So why was this Joseph's sons significant?
They were significant, and it's interesting. I don't have this. I meant to write it down in my notes. It's Psalm 136, I want to say off the top of my head. But there's a specific psalm where it says that God set aside Ephraim and chose Judah. Because if you look in the very next chapter, in chapter 49, he declares that Judah will not fail to have a lawgiver until Shiloh comes. Shiloh being Jesus. But it's not necessarily that Messiah is going to come through Ephraim, but that Ephraim will be the greater of the two of Joseph's sons. That's why he made the hall of faith. Because it's not because of the transferal of all of the Abrahamic Covenant. It was part of the Abrahamic Covenant. They would receive a land, but the blessing would come through Judah's line. But yes.
Yeah, that's what.
Yep. I had the same thought when I was reading it at first. I thought, but wait a second. Jesus came through Judah, and he did. But Ephraim and Manasseh, two people who shouldn't have had land in the land of Canaan, but two people who did. Ephraim, the youngest, got the greatest. Manasseh got a big portion of land, but wasn't an incredibly significant tribe. So, all of this forward-looking faith. Look here at the last. We'll look at Joseph. This would be Abraham's great-grandson. Patient faith. In verse 22 of Hebrews 11, by faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. Joseph was a partial recipient of the Abrahamic Covenant, as were all of the sons of Jacob, right? What portion of the Abrahamic Covenant did they receive?
Promise, all.
The promise, but because they were sons of Jacob, they also received part of the land, right? They had a portion of the land that was theirs within the land of promise. And when Joseph was dying, none of the sons of Jacob or their families lived in the promised land. Where did they live? Well, they lived in Goshen. Why did they live in Goshen? Because they had moved down there during the famine, and that's where they were living. And even though Joseph's physical home had been in Egypt almost his entire life, he would have been a young teenager when he was taken by force and sold into Egypt into slavery, though most of his life had been spent in Egypt, his desire was that after his death, his bones be taken and buried in the land that had been promised to Abraham. Why? Well, because he wanted to make sure that his bones were where they were supposed to be. Now, it's interesting because how many brothers did he have?
11.
Yeah, he had 11, right? He's one of 12. Where's Benjamin buried? We don't know. Where's Judah buried? Well, we don't know. Where's Joseph buried? Well, we do know that. Why? Because Joseph took God at his word and he said, look, it's not going to be during my lifetime because I'm going to die soon. So it's not going to be during my lifetime, but sometime when God comes and visits his children here in Egypt, I want you to take my bones with you because you won't be here long. So, do you see the faith? The faith that though I won't see it, I want you to haul my bones with you because I have confidence that God is going to fulfill his word.
Were they in the ark?
No.
Didn't they took his dad's bones too, though, didn't they? They took Isaac's bones too, right?
They took Isaac's bones. When Isaac passed,
Oh, that's right.
they took him, they embalmed him according to the way of Egypt, and then they took him right away. Well, right away in accordance with Egyptian burial. But yeah, very soon they took him and buried him. But Joseph they took and they embalmed him. Genesis 50 is where we read about it. It says, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I died. That's one way of breaking it to your family. I died. And God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, surely God will visit you. And ye shall carry up my bones from hence. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And they didn't leave. They didn't haul him up right away. They just had his bones. They had his body there in Egypt in a coffin. But Joseph was firmly convinced that though he would never live to see God fulfill his promise, he knew God will fulfill his promise. And when he does, my last request is that you take my body and you bury it in the land that God had promised. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. All three of these men, we have Isaac, we have Jacob, we have Joseph, the patriarchs is how we refer to them, showed confidence in the ability of God to keep his word, in spite of the fact that all of them would be dead when it was fulfilled. None of them would live to see this fulfilled. Isaac passed the blessing of the Abrahamic Covenant to his younger son, Jacob. Didn't make sense culturally, but God ordained that it happen. Jacob willingly blessed the younger son of Joseph, Ephraim, with full confidence that God would fulfill the blessing, though he wouldn't be around to see it. And Joseph manifested faith by leaving instructions for the care of his body to ensure that he would be buried within the land of promise. Again, all kinds of faith, given the fact that none of them would live to see this fulfillment.
Yet to be resurrected.
Yet to be resurrected?
Adam and Eve haven't been resurrected yet either, have they?
Yeah, no. Kind of interesting when you think about the tremendous faith that it would take to put everything on something that you don't see. It gives evidence of things not seen, as we read here in Hebrews. Also interesting that Genesis starts in the beginning with God, and it ends in Genesis 51, verse 26, with man in a coffin. It kind of gives you everything, the whole gamut, from the beginning to the end.